Okay, welcome back to TBARW Gaming. This is part 2 of the trade tutorial, and we're going to talk strategy in this one. So if you missed part 1, this should come up in the little corner up there. And we'll talk about the generic ideas of trade and how trade value is formulated and how it gets moved around and things like that. Now we're going to talk about what strategies can you have and what rules of thumb do I have to make sure that you are getting the most possible. Now, the number one rule of trade in Europa Universalis 4 is, of course, that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. You can take guesses, though, and you can take educated guesses, but the reason you don't know what's going to happen is because you're not the only actor on the board. So, if England decides to move their merchants around at the same point that I move my merchants around, that might actually change a lot of what's happening on the board. If Hungary starts moving things, really, even if someone over here moves things around, that could drastically change where trade is. But for the most part, the AI doesn't like to change things around too much, so you're probably going to be doing mostly, if you change something, it's probably going to have an impact and be pretty much where you are and have that desired impact, especially if you have that guess correctly. But there are some ways that you can guess a little bit better. So what are some of the things that I do and ways in which I try to guess as well as possible? Well, there's some things that I have and some general rules of thumb. Number one is that I have not really been changing to even try something until I have 50% trade power. It's like, for instance, in Bordeaux, I only have 42% of that trade power. So even if I wanted to do anything with it, which I don't, we'll get to why I don't there, I probably wouldn't move a merchant there because I'm only impacting 42% of it. Whereas in like Champagne, I'm operating 56%. Now that's a little bit of there's a little bit of caveats to that, but for the most part, that's a general rule of thumb. The exception to that is that if I can have a significant impact directly next to something that I have a ton of power and I'm collecting in. So for instance, right here, I have 25% impact here in the Vienna node. But as you saw in the other one, that's a difference between 5 and 21 getting sent into Venice, where I have 80% and I'm collecting. So that is certainly something that I have that merchant there because that's, a lot of money right there. Whereas in Bordeaux, it would not be as effective because in order to get to where I'm collecting it, it's got to go 42% on into 56%, and then only that amount, only 56% of 42% gets sent down. So the second rule of thumb is to kind of be as close to where you're collecting as possible. So you want to keep your merchants, you want to keep your actions impacted on the next one up the stream from wherever you have until you run out of power. So that's the basic idea there. And then, another rule of thumb, only change something if you really don't like what's happening. So for instance, directly upstream is Tunis. And I have 92% trade power in Tunis. Why am I not doing anything with a merchant in Tunis? Well, the reason is I don't really care what happens in Tunis. I did go to war with Tunis to get them to transfer their trade power to me, so only 0.4 value in trade power stops in Tunis. The rest of it goes on. Now, there's other nations that are telling it where to go. Right? Spain, Brazil, Morocco, and Pomerania are all impacting where this is going. But the reality is that in the three places it could go, I have 97%, 94%, and 94%. So I don't care where it goes. Wherever it goes, I'm getting over 90% of that value. So they can, play with it as they want. It's going to wind up in my pockets anyway. So I don't need to influence anything that's happening here. because I don't really care. That's the same thing with Bordeaux here. You can see that no trade value is being kept in Bordeaux. No one is collecting in Bordeaux. So I don't really have to worry about it, right? All of the trade value is getting sent upstream. If you go in here, none of it is being collected. So it's all going in, and it's going into Champagne. There's only one place it can go, from Bordeaux into Champagne. Now, if Bordeaux could go to the English Channel instead of Champagne, then maybe I would want to influence to say, no, I want you to go to some place I have 56% trade power instead of 22. But it's can't. So this is going where I want it to go anyway, so I don't need a trade person there. Same thing with Valencia here. I actually own like all the land in Valencia. There is a little bit of trade power from Morocco from light ships, and then from the Papal State, because they have a little bit of power in Genoa, but that's it. And so for the most part, the money that's coming in to Valencia, 194, is going out. You can see that my March Genoa is transferring that out, and it can only go one place, out to Genoa, where I will be collecting it. So as long as that 211 is still going out, then I don't really care, and I don't care about the 8.6 that is being collected. It's not worth a merchant. Now, this of course is being divided up. Here, 8.2 is being kept by Morocco in Safi, and 13.65. I have 59% trade power. I could come in here and throw my weight around, and I could send a merchant to transfer the trade power, but that's only 13. So you have to kind of qualify, okay, how much is there? And in reality, it wouldn't even be 13. It would move up maybe 5 or 7. Whereas, like I said, that one in Vienna over here, I know from past tests and moving things around, that this is worth 14. This is actually worth about 15 to 16 ducats getting moved over to where I have 80%. So I have, it's worth 80% of 15 or 16 ducats. So that's something that I really want to keep the merchant there instead of in Safi. Now, if I went and got a different merchant, then maybe I could use it in Safi, or I could use it in Tunis, etc. The other rules of thumb is you want as many light ships as possible. So in my tutorial playthrough with Spain, I mentioned that you want to have enough transports to transport an army, and then up to force limit in light ships. And in fact, I've actually gone, I think, over force limit in light ships alone. I have. So I have that transporting of an army at 50, actually a little bit more than transporting an army. And then I have more than my force limit in light ships and a combat fleet on top of it. And I'm still making 800 ducats a month. The reason is that a light ship protecting trade done correctly will pay for itself. And so, you don't want to go completely overboard. You don't want to have, double your force limit or something like that. But Navy isn't really that bad in going over force limit, the penalties that are there. And so that's something that you can do. Having that transport fleet, maybe even 2 transport fleets that can transport an entire army, and then, that one combat fleet of 10 to 20 heavy ships, and the rest, light ships, light ships, light ships, light ships, and they will pay for themselves. Also, flagship. You can build a flagship. You want it to be a light ship. And you want it to be a light ship that has the benefit of trade power. And then you're going to put that one in the most important node that you have a lot of competition in, which for me is in the Caribbean over here. So you want to have that as your flagship. If you're doing trade, this is what you want to make sure you're doing. Generally speaking, my rule of thumb, until colonialism, I'm going to keep them in groups of 10 because the amount of trade power is not really that much, and the extra trade power that the fleet can give, even in 10, is pretty solid. I think the light ship by then is giving only 2 or 2.5 trade power per ship, but still, the provinces aren't doing that well. Mercantilism isn't that high, and so the actual bonuses from trade power and stuff like that aren't really that good. When colonialism shows up, you can see that that gives an extra 10% to every single province, and so you need to respond to that with your light ships. So from colonialism showing up till roughly 1600-ish, I like to keep them in groups of 20 if possible, light ships, because that will help balance out the colonialism boost to all of the trade power coming from the provinces. And then from about 1600 on, you start to have the actual colonies start to grow, and they're going to greatly increase the value and the power that's being messed around with out here. So at that point, you want to have them up in groups of 40 if at all possible, and you can see that I have mine in groups of 40, except for this one, which is in 42 because I captured a ship. If you have extra light ships, putting them in a node where you have a lot of competition, maybe even you're losing, isn't a terrible idea of going up to 50, 60, 70, but you want to be strategic with this as well. You'll notice that I don't have light ships in every place I have a merchant. You definitely want to make sure your light ships are operating in places you have a merchant, but you don't need to operate everywhere. I don't have one that's operating in Venice, for instance. I do have ones that are operating in the English Channel. You want to keep your light ships operating in places that are extremely important or that you have a lot of competition. Venice is an end node, but it's not extremely important. And part of the reason for that is actually me. I'm using my merchants to transfer from Ragusa away from Venice over to Genoa, and from Alexandria away from Venice over to Genoa. So Venice actually only has a value of, it's only having 22 incoming and 23 total for a total of 46. Now my merchant is collecting, 83 here because of some of the trading benefits that I have. But still, that's not that much. And so, certainly nothing compared to the 340 that's coming in from Genoa and the 731 that we're collecting here. So I don't really need the trade ships in Venice. But in England, in the English Channel, where we collect 62, every bit of it, right? I don't have that much land up here, and I really wasn't interested in challenging England for getting more of that land in the English Channel, or trying to steal it from imperial provinces. So we did what we could. I upgraded the centers of trade in Holland, but I need those light ships. I need that to get a little bit more percent of the trade power in England, so you're going to want to have that there. And then obviously you want to identify the most important nodes that you're transferring out of and keep those light ships present in those nodes. So, Sevilla is kind of a block. There's a lot of people trying to influence in Sevilla and collect in Sevilla. And so I want to make sure they have as much trade power as possible. And so Spain, Morocco, and Brazil are all trying to collect there. I'm going to make sure that they are out. However, really, that 97% here, in fact, let me test something. Again, you just take educated guesses. I have 97%. This fleet is providing 200 trade power. And going from 2,200 to 2,000, maybe that's not going to be that big of a deal. If I move them to the English Channel and make 80 in the English Channel, this is going to go down because I don't have as much trade power. I don't have the same percentage, so my merchant is not going to affect anything, but the English Channel is going to go up. So instead of 877, I'm going to make a different amount. Let's make sure that that fleet is making it up to the English Channel. Yep, they're both in the English Channel now, and so we have the next month is done. We're up to 890. And so you can see that those trade ships were providing a whopping 1% here. But in the English Channel, they're providing 7%. It went from 22 to 29. You do get diminishing returns eventually. So that's something to remember. Even though I'm getting diminishing returns, I still think I'm going to keep that one in Genoa, just because that's the end node. That's the big collection point. I want to get as much as I can for what's coming in here. But this is the basic idea I have for trade ships, and I put in here not to use trade ships if you already have 80% power before the trade ships. So this is 81%, so I'm going to keep these trade ships here because before the trade ships it would be in the 70s. And that's just so your merchant is the most effective it can be. So what strategies do I suggest? Mainly, I think you're going to want to have the strategy of getting to an end node or creating an end node, but ideally get to one. If you're playing in Europe, get your trade capital to Genoa, Venice, or the English Channel. If you can get enough trade power to really start to dominate in more than one of them, fantastic. But definitely get to Genoa, the English Channel, or Venice. And really, it's Genoa or the English Channel. I'm sorry to Venice, but it's just, it loses its importance as the game goes on. So you really want to be in Genoa or the English Channel after 1600 because of colonies over in the West, over in the New World. There is a way you can do, though, if you're stuck with Venice for whatever reason, there is a way you can do that, but that's kind of where you want to be. The next thing I want to mention is that you start to develop your centers of trade, and you want to develop them from your home node out. So you'll notice that I have done the centers of trade to level 3, but these are level 2s. This was my home node at the start of the game, so there's a little bit left over. In fact, that's not even mine. That is... that's Lorraine. So a lot of set level 2s there. But I was in Genoa. I've done level 3s in Genoa, and then I've worked my way out. I believe you're only allowed one level 3 per state as well. So I couldn't upgrade this one even if I tried. But, I didn't need, again, there was no competition in Valencia, so I didn't need to upgrade those. But in Sevilla, there was competition until about 20 years ago. So I upgraded a lot of those just to make sure that that happened there. If I wanted to, I could upgrade the ones in Ragusa here, and that would increase my trade power there. I can get to level 2, and you'll notice you have to be at peace to do this. I can't upgrade to World Port because I already have 11. So if I got another merchant, maybe I could have 12. There used to be a cap on that, but there's not anymore. I'm going to actually upgrade this one too in Venice. Okay, so to upgrade, you have to be in a trade company or in a state. So we'll state the Venice one, just so that I can upgrade that. And so that will increase my trade power in Venice. It'll increase my trade power in Ragusa from those actions there. And in fact, if that produces the trade company to get up to 50%, then that would do what it needs to do, and that would give me another merchant. But you kind of have that idea. But you want to develop from your center out. So I could also develop in Tunis, right? I could do this. Also, developing, actually developing. I'm assuming here. Yeah, so base production gives plus 1.2. So if I develop in diplomatic, now base production gives 1.4. So it looks like for every diplomatic point that you develop in a province, you get 0.2 goods produced. So you want to increase how valuable your trade is, increase your development in the good trade value provinces. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on what trade goods are good and what trade goods are not good, but you can kind of look through 3.75, 2, 3.4, 3.4, 2, just look through and see, okay, what ones are really good, what ones are not. So this one's iron, 4.5. So you want to get as much, trade goods produced there to get that going. You're going to want to develop from your furthest out in so that you can maximize that there, unless you get cut off somewhere. So that's what you want to do. You want to have that, and then you want to also control those nodes. You'll notice that I have attacked and taken over the centers of trade in these nodes, and I did not bother cleaning up Spain. because I didn't really need to. I didn't bother cleaning up Morocco because those aren't centers of trade, right? So they don't matter. So that's what you want to do. You want to control end nodes. You want to develop your centers of trade, build up your centers of trade, and kind of go out from there up the streams in contested nodes, because if it's not contested, then you don't need more trade power. That's just a waste of ducats. Now, if you happen to have 170,000 and you want to waste those ducats, fine. But without that, you don't really need to worry about that. Increasing them unless there's competition in the node. And when you're conquering, you want to focus on centers of trade first. Now, these are going to be more aggressive expansion as well, just because they're simply a center of trade. But, if you can conquer them, that will starve out your enemies a lot faster and will increase you. Another strategy, before I get into some kind of generic places you're going to want to conquer out, is to actually feed marches and vassals centers of trade, because I am allowed only 11 centers of trade that are up to level 3, because that's how many merchants I have. However, each of my vassals is allowed some more. So you'll notice this province here, I can't develop that because it's a world port. Let me make sure this works. Hopefully this works. But if I grant this province, grant the province of Eastern to my vassal who's in that, or my march in this case, who's in that area, he only has, well, he has 2 already, so hopefully he has another merchant. Every time the province changes hands, that changes by 1. And so he's got to state it. I hope he did. I can increase it to 2, and then I can increase it to 3. So I couldn't before, but now that I've handed it off to my march, I could. Now I can increase it to level 3. But remember, in the subject interaction, they're transferring all their trade power, so that's increasing that up. So if you give your vassals and marches that you're creating in these end nodes, so that you can have that capital in the end node, and they're using their merchants to feed into the end node as well, if you give them the centers of trade, then you can upgrade them to level 3 without it costing you, without it combining for you. So that's a little bit of an extra strategy there. So let's talk about the kind of generic routes of ways in which you can conquer to get a lot of money. Basically, these are what real-life nations did. Obviously, Europa Universalis 4, Paradox wants to be that kind of history simulator, and so they're going to be doing that. They're going to be looking at that. The first one is to follow the England route, to follow what Great Britain did, and that is to own the English Channel. Now, for this, you're going to want to own the whole English Channel, so you want to own some of this land down here, and that is imperial land, so you're going to have to worry about that. But you want to own the English Channel, and then you want to work up from there. So you want to own the North Sea, maybe even Lübeck. You don't have to. You can directly go from the North Sea over, but I kind of like the idea of going North Sea, Lübeck, and then over to the English Channel if you can control enough of Lübeck here. But otherwise, you're going to control the North Sea, and then you're going to start gunning over here. And you want to control all of this from the Rockies east. So you want to control Hudson Bay, Mississippi River, Ohio, Gulf of St. Lawrence, Chesapeake Bay, Rio Grande, Mexico, and Panama, preferably. And then the Caribbean. And basically, you're going to take all of that, you're going to transfer it into the Caribbean, and then from the Caribbean, you're going to go to the Chesapeake Bay, and then to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then to the North Sea, and then over to the English Channel, and you're going to get all of this, including everything that comes into the Caribbean, which is one of the main hubs. You're going to get it all up to the English Channel, and it will be wonderful for you. So that's the first way of doing trade, is to have the English Channel, and then all of North America through the Caribbean feeding into it. Now, if you can't get the Caribbean, you can transfer from the Mississippi River up into Ohio, into Chesapeake Bay, and then on up Gulf of St. Lawrence, North Sea, etc. And you can even do Rio Grande into Mississippi River and on up around. You can bypass the Caribbean, but one of the things about having the Caribbean is that Panama and Amazons oftentimes will feed into the Caribbean. And in fact, if you keep going down, you can do that too, right? Lima can feed into Panama, that can feed into the Caribbean, Amazons on in. This is a very New World centered approach. Approach number 2 would be the Spain route. So this would be controlling the Sevilla node, ideally heading into the Genoa node, but even if you didn't, Sevilla is a good place where things can be cut off. And if I own 96%, 97% of Sevilla node and I'm collecting here, then not a lot of it is getting sent off into Genoa. You're able to collect there and really get a lot of that money. So if you own Sevilla or Genoa, then you can start going out. Now Spain, if you remember, conquered a lot of this. So here, this is the same general idea. You're going to conquer everything that can go into the Caribbean or into the Ivory Coast. And here in this case, you're going to also take the Ivory Coast and the Caribbean and everything that can feed into the Caribbean, or everything in the New World that can feed into the Ivory Coast, which is Brazil, the Amazons, De Plata, the new one down here in Patagonia, all of that stuff can feed into the Ivory Coast, and then you're going to have the Ivory Coast either feed directly into Sevilla, or the Ivory Coast can feed into the Caribbean. So if you have enough trade power, enough strength in the Caribbean, which I don't, you can do Ivory Coast into the Caribbean, into the Sevilla, and get that extra merchant multiplier that way as well. But ideally, you're going to have that. You're going to have Ivory Coast into Sevilla, and the Caribbean into Sevilla, and then Sevilla into Valencia, into Genoa, however far you go. If you're playing as Spain, likely you're going to have a lot of the Valencia node under your control, so it's not a bad idea to go ahead and transfer out of Sevilla into Valencia and collect there. But this is the Spain route, and in fact, this is actually the route that I'm using right now playing as Switzerland to get my 890 here. Is I've taken over Genoa. This is where I'm getting most of my stuff and where I've developed the most. I've taken over Genoa, I've taken over Valencia, I've taken over Sevilla, I've taken over the Ivory Coast, and I've taken over the Caribbean. And in fact, I didn't have to do any more, right? I still have 58% power in the Caribbean, and they're still feeding the Caribbean. They're not trying to collect in Panama and Mexico for the most part. They're still feeding the Caribbean, and I'm still stealing it directly out of the Caribbean on over into Sevilla, and then right over into my coffers over in Genoa. The third route is the Portugal route. And so if you remember from history, Portugal was here and they went south. So here you're going to again take over the Sevilla node and then Valencia and Genoa if you want to, but mainly the Sevilla node because you can stop it here. And then you're going to take over the Ivory Coast to make sure that all the trade you're about to get will wind up in Sevilla and not in the New World or the English Channel. And then you're going to take over the Cape of Good Hope, and you're just going to build backwards, stream backwards from there. Now, from the Cape of Good Hope, you can take Zanzibar if you want, or you can follow these over to here. You can see that there is one coming out of Coromandel, and there's one coming out of Malacca. So, that's going to be your basic hope. You're either going to head up in Zanzibar and then to the Gulf of Aden, or you're going to, Coromandel, Malacca, but ideally, you're going to try and take over the Gulf of Aden, Zanzibar, and then Gujarat, all of India over here, Gujarat, Deccan, Coromandel, Bengal, and Malacca. And you're just going to feed it from, Malacca to Bengal, to Coromandel, to Gujarat, to the Gulf of Aden, and then right on down to Zanzibar, to the Cape of Good Hope, to the Ivory Coast, and right up to Sevilla, where you're going to finally collect it. Now, like I said, Venice is pretty weak. So there isn't really a Venice plan that I would suggest, But if you get stuck in Venice, that's the only place you can go, and you're not strong enough to take over whoever is over here in Genoa and take over the Genoa node, you can make a lot of the trade go from Genoa into Venice. And that would be to try and get, obviously you can get this stuff over here, but mainly, if you can get Ragusa, great. But mainly you're going to want to come down here, and you're going to want to take over Alexandria. Now, I will mention that oftentimes Alexandria is taken over by pretty powerful people. It starts under the control of the Mamluks, one of the great powers at the start of the game, and it often falls to the Ottomans. So that's not going to be easy. But if you can take over Alexandria, then you can get Alexandria to transfer from there to Venice instead of over to Genoa, and that's going to be really big. And then the big one you want to take over is the Gulf of Aden. If you have the Gulf of Aden, then you can expand out into India the same way that Portugal would, except instead of sending it from the Gulf of Aden around the south, you're going to send it from the Gulf of Aden into Alexandria and then directly into Venice. And that will create a significant trade income. It won't be as big as if you transferred it all the way around and collected all the extra stuff from Africa, but it's not nothing. And it's something you can do if you're determined to play in Venice. But honestly, if you're playing in Venice, just go conquer Genoa. It's going to be way easier, and there's going to be a lot more money coming in over there. Ideally, of course, you could do more than one, and you have enough trade power to collect in more than one. Generally speaking, about 1600, it probably becomes beneficial to take the penalty and use a merchant in both, in more than one end node, and just kind of have that. If you're not able to take an end node, let's say you're playing someone in India or someone in Arabia, something like that, let's say you're playing Ethiopia or something like that, then what you want to do is you want to get to some of those choke points and try and make that an end node. So if I control all of the Gulf of Aden power, maybe even all of the Alexandria power, if I were Ethiopia and I managed to conquer up into Alexandria, but I couldn't conquer past Constantinople or something like that, then in theory, I could control as much of Alexandria as I could, with light ships, with centers of trade, with everything in my power, get this number up as high as I can, like for instance I've done in Sevilla over here with the 97%, and just collect here and try and put a stopper on it, and get all of that India power right up into Alexandria and stop it here. You're not going to get all of it, like I didn't in Sevilla, but you're going to get most of it, and that can be a powerful thing. The thing is, if you're going to do that, make sure you're only collecting in that one place, and you're using your other merchants to transfer into it. So you definitely don't want to have a merchant transferring out of Zanzibar if you're collecting in Alexandria. That's kind of where that is. You want to be conquering downstream, you want to have that, and you want to make sure your trade capital is there even if you have to move it. So that is the basic strategies there, and certainly I haven't necessarily come up with the best practices for trade companies yet, but I do think that you don't want to use a trade company unless you need that merchant or you have already plenty of taxation income and things like that, because remember that a trade company is not a state, and so this has a autonomy floor. Now, because of my stuff, the autonomy floor is at 70, but it starts at a base of 90. The economic hegemon moved it down to 70. It starts at a base of 90, which means that you're not going to get very much of the production or the taxes. But if you have a trade company, you actually have that reduced by half. So you can see that the local autonomy modifies it by only minus 35 as opposed to minus 70%. That's because of the trade company for production. It's still 70% for taxes. When it's 90%, you're not getting very much taxes, and you're really not getting that much in production from these provinces. This would be solely trade. So if you don't really care about that production, because you either have that much money already or it's not that much production, make it a trade company, try and get that extra merchant. But if you need that income, majorly try and state it instead. But late game, those trade companies, especially in powerful places, that's something you're going important nodes, things like the Ivory Coast. You want to make those trade companies at that point. Let's talk about what are the most important nodes in my mind. Most important nodes in my mind, the ones you want to control the most: Genoa, and ideally, transferring into Genoa if it's not being occupied. So, Valencia would be part of that. Sevilla would be part of that. But Genoa, obviously, and the English Channel are extremely important. Venice, like I said, less so. I think Venice can be basically waylaid. But Genoa and the English Channel. If you're in Genoa, you want to make sure you own, like I said, Valencia, Sevilla, and preferably the Caribbean or the Ivory Coast to make sure that lucrative trade from the New World in the Caribbean and from the India's area in the Ivory Coast, make sure it goes to Sevilla and not to the English Channel, because both of those can send them to the English Channel. The Ivory Coast can actually send it directly to the English Channel, and the Caribbean can send it to Bordeaux, or I can send it, like I talked about earlier, up North America and up into the North Sea and to the English Channel. So if you're playing in Genoa and in Genoa exclusively, you want to make sure that those are sending them the way they're supposed to do. If you are playing in Venice, then you're wanting to control Alexandria, the Gulf of Aden, maybe even Constantinople, to ensure that a lot of that trade is making its way where it is supposed to go. And obviously in the English Channel, you're going to want to control Lubeck if you can, but definitely the North Sea, and then on over to here. And preferably, if you can control the Caribbean, if you control the Ivory Coast, you can make sure that, like I said, that lucrative trade from the colonies, especially the colonies here around the Gulf of Mexico, and then the lucrative trade from India goes to you instead of whoever's in Sevilla. So those are there. Which means, what are the most important nodes that aren't in nodes? That would be the Ivory Coast, because of the sheer number of places it can go. The Ivory Coast, and not only places it can go, but what it comes into it. Like I said, the India trade collects in the Ivory Coast. It consolidates in the Ivory Coast before splitting up from there. So this is a really important node to have. The Caribbean, because of the same reason in the New World, it all kind of collects in the Caribbean. You see so many places coming into it. So if you can control that, you can make it go to you instead of someone else. So especially if you're playing a colonizing old world nation such as Spain or France or England, you want to control those two so that you can make sure that the trade goes where you want it to go. And the last one is the Gulf of Aden, because if you only control the Ivory Coast and the Caribbean, then in theory, someone could come in the Gulf of Aden and make all of the India trade not get to you. Just go straight up the Gulf of Aden into Alexandria. And in fact, that might happen in some of your games. Now, right now, I get a little bit lucky because that is not controlled by anyone in particular. It's got the Mamluks in Yemen, and all sorts of different people have power in that node. But in theory, that could be a stopper for some of that trade, and that would greatly reduce what I would have there. So those are the main and I think most important nodes in the old world, at least: Venice, Genoa, and the English Channel, because they're end nodes, and then the Ivory Coast, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Aden. But an honorable mention over here, you can see that places such as Beijing have a lot that gets fed into them. Canton has a lot of places it could go, so if you control that, that's really important. Malacca, same thing. A lot of things come into Malacca, so if you can stop it here or direct it up to you, if you're playing like in the Bengal or something like that, that's another really important node to have. And these nodes over here are where a lot of the trade value, where a lot of the money is actually created, and then gets sent out. I happen to click on one that doesn't create a lot. But a lot of these have spices. They have some really, really, really good trade things, and then they can be built up to have a lot of the value. But I wasn't playing over here, so I didn't build those up. So there's no manufactories in these places, so they're not doing that well yet. But certainly, those are important nodes over there as well. The last thing I want to talk about is trade companies themselves. Like I said at the beginning, they're going to give you a autonomy of 90% unless you can modify that. The global or the economic hegemon, if you can make 1,000 ducats, but let's face it, if you're making 1,000 ducats, you probably aren't needing this guide anymore. We'll lower it to 70. Also, expansion ideas, I think it is, lowers it by 10. So that would lower it to 80 at least. But basically, if you're doing a trade company, it has to be outside of your super region, and you have to really not care about the income coming from that place. It will increase the governing cost and your governing capacity from a territory to a trade company does increase it by 25%. So it's not the full amount that stating it would increase the governing capacity, but you do have to recognize that as well. But some benefits come from the trade company. The first is that you can basically ignore religion. So right now, my tolerance of heathens is at negative 0.2. And all of these provinces are heathens. But I don't get any problems from that because it's in a trade company. And since it's in a trade company, I don't have to worry about religious unrest. That's not a thing. Also, I can't convert it. You'll notice I have negative 190% missionary strength in this province. So I can't convert it, but I don't get any penalties from it. In fact, I don't get any penalties in my religious unity either, because all of these are in trade companies. So unless you're going for one faith, you can remove some of your religious penalties. Again, if you have a trade company that gets 50%, that'll give you a merchant, an extra merchant, which you can use to steer more trade around and influence things. If you have 10 provinces in a trade company, that will give you plus 5% global trade power. It doesn't actually say that there, so I guess that's in colonies. If you have 5% in, or 10 provinces in a colony, you get plus 5 global trade power, which is really, really important. So I had it wrong. I thought it was in trade companies. So yeah, if you have that, that's more global trade power, and I think that affects every single source of trade power in the game, so that's really, really important. The last thing with trade companies is that every place that has a trade company, you can make an improvement. Per trade company, you can pick one of these buildings. You can have one that gives you 5 land force limit, one that gives you 5 naval force limit, one that gives you plus 50% trade steering, and I think that's only in that node, but it might be, worldwide. Yearly army tradition of plus 0.03, and trade value modifier for the entire charter of plus 10. That's not bad at all. And then more Marines. So that's something from the 1.3 update. So you have those special units that can land quicker. And then minimum autonomy in the entire charter to -5, which would lower you to 85% if you were at base. So that's also a way to get a little bit more money. Personally, this is 5 more light ships. So I actually built this one in both of my trade companies. That's the one I built. It's 5 more light ships. This one is pretty good too, though. The trade value modifier increases the trade, but honestly, I would build the Admiralty. And then also you have these buildings here, and each state can build one of these. And so, and these are, upgradable buildings. So if you have one, if you have this one, you have the lower one as well. This is defensiveness and supply limits. This is local trade power for the entire state. This is production efficiency. This is taxes. and this is manpower. Personally, I would only recommend the harbor one, the trade power, +4 for each place in the state. You can only build one per state. You see it's on the state menu. And then production efficiency is not bad either. Local good produce there as well. That'll give you a little bit, but remember you're only collecting half your production, so it's not great there. But that would be a good one as well. The Brookers Exchange and the Company Depot, the harbor and the local venture, and you can do that in every state that has any one province in the trade company. However, if you have provinces that are in the trade company and provinces that are not in the trade company, then it would only affect the ones in the trade company. But you'll notice that I have the harbor here. And by the way, I only have 3 provinces in the trade company in my Tunisian trade company. Yet, I can still build that and get 5 naval force limit. And then each one of these, that province is +4 trade power. Which, that +4 trade power, this is something, again, I can do. I can do that. That's 5 more light ships that I'm not paying extra for right there. And then here I can build the harbors out for these places that I have in states, and that will increase the trade power in my nodes. So if I go one more month, then my trade power should go up. It did. We're up to 70. And the trade company now is giving me an extra merchant. So now I have an extra merchant. So by just spending a little bit of money, getting that extra trade power, there you go. I have that merchant now. And so that would be, even more. Now I can put that in Tunis, or I can put that in Safi, or I could put that, wherever I wanted that merchant to go. So that's, really, really important, big stuff there. So that's basically all that I have for trade, the strategies, the things that it does. I hope this has been informative for you, and that you can feel much more confident going in to trade away from here on out. But I have been Takabolo Gaming. If you have enjoyed this, if you've learned anything from this, please do like, comment, subscribe down below. It really helps me understand what's doing well on the channel and what I don't need to do any more of. So please do like, comment, subscribe down below, and I will see you next time.